Helen McHugh from Sport Ireland. You're very welcome to Sport for Business.
Hi Rob, thanks very much. Great to be here.
Tell me, I never fail to be inspired when I talk to Aidan and hear what he says. It is an area that sport can play a crucial role, and I think, as we alluded to, has come up short in years gone by. Tell me the inspiration for this new, diversity and inclusion, the big research project which you've been running, and then we'll just talk a little bit about how it's been met and how it's been engaged with. But what was the genesis? Where did it come from in the first place?
Sure. So I suppose, there's kind of two strands to it. One is inclusion is a core value in the work that we do. It's a value in our national sports policy, and also there's a lot of work being done in this space in Sport Ireland in terms of our, the policy we have on participation in sport by people with disabilities, the women in sport policy, the overall inclusion work that's been done, which is underway and which is ongoing. But within that, we kind of recognise that there was a need to, first of all, broaden the scope of that work that we're doing, to expand it out a little bit, then also maybe to place a strategic focus on that work, to, for ourselves in Sport Ireland, identify what's our vision here, what's the mission, what do we want to do, what kind of actions do we need to take in order to promote diversity and inclusion in the sports sector within Sport Ireland, but also with the partners that we work with. So how can we support national governing bodies, local sports partnerships, the entire sports sector, and kind of lead the way in terms of the work that needs to be done to, number one, make sure that sport is a welcoming and inclusive environment, and also to make sure that people are aware of that fact, that it carries on right down to grassroots level. So that's probably, that's kind of where it came from. The role that I have as diversity and inclusion manager was a newly appointed role towards the end of 2019, which I suppose signals as well Sport Ireland's desire to move into this space and to expand on the work that they're doing in this space as well. So that's kind of where it came from. And I suppose within that, in getting into that work, there's a lot of stuff that we're aware of already in Sport Ireland and in the sports sector, with the work that's underway, with the experience that we have, with some of the research that's already been carried out, in the Irish Sports Monitor and things like that. But there's kind of a critical step within that we felt it was really important to undertake to inform this work that we're doing. And that's that engagement piece that we've had underway with people with lived experiences, specifically, also with the sports sector, again, specifically in relation to diversity and inclusion, and with the general public as well, to hear everybody's views, which will shape the direction that we take, the actions that we need to take as well. So that's kind of where it came from.
It is always really important not to imagine that we know, to actually hear from from those that are experiencing it at first hand. And it's great that Sport Ireland should be driving this, because oftentimes it can be advocacy on one side, but power and funding on the other, whereas Sport Ireland is the channel through which government funds Irish sport. So you're very central to a relationship. Whenever Sport Ireland calls, sporting organisations tend to pick up the phone. So that's great that you're seeing this, and they've made the appointment of you into that role. What's the engagement been like with the survey from? I'm guessing that the sporting organisations will have, because they've got a good relationship with you guys, that they will have been, they won't have been slow in coming forward. But the wider community, that lived experience, the people who are actually, sort of dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, have they spoken to you?
Yeah, so the engagement has been excellent, really strong as well, really impactful. Information coming back to us that I think we can really take. Just to say, we're still in the process of getting the final report in, so I don't have any I don't have any major findings or anything that I can go through today. But just in general, in terms of the themes of what we're getting back and the level of engagement that I suppose we experienced over the last number of months, it just goes to show, number one, I think the interest in this area, number two, the importance of it. So particularly from, again, talking about people with lived experiences, of the barriers and the enablers and the importance of sport, and the kind of insight that we can really only gain from listening to them and from hearing their voices. It's been really excellent, really strong. In the LGBTQ community in particular, we've had some really strong engagement with them, some really informative and impactful contributions. Some of the stuff, I suppose, as you said, we don't want to assume that we know everything, or that we know the direction we're going to go in. So while some of the stuff around visibility and around education and awareness and things like that is I suppose kind of standard in this space, hearing those lived experiences and hearing from the people directly really, I suppose, puts that kind of personal touch on things, and is really impactful, and has certainly been impactful for me over the last few months as I've been working on this.
Have you? I appreciate the fact that you don't have any of the the sort of the final details on the research, but I look forward. We'll definitely give that a good splash when it comes out into the published world. But in terms of sort of dipping in and out of it, do you feel as though there is something radical that will emerge from this, that will lead to a significant improvement in that lived experience?
So I suppose the radical piece is really going to be that our steer in Sport Ireland is coming from these communities, from what they're telling us in terms of their needs, and what we can put in place to make those changes. I think a lot of it is, there are some structural changes, there are some cultural changes, or some improvements that can be made in that. It's definitely going to be a long road on this. There are maybe some immediate actions, or some immediate interventions that can take place, but there are also there's also a journey that we need to go on with this, and I think that's really important in the diversity and inclusion space. We need to go on it, and we're in a privileged position in Sport Ireland to be able to lead on this, and to be able to bring people on the journey with us. But it is definitely, for some elements of it, it's going to be a long road, and maybe the impact won't be seen immediately, but it'll be down the line. But there's definitely some particular areas where that piece, going back to the let's get visible, just for example, that we're talking about here, that visibility piece of role models and representation is obviously really important, but turning it on its head a little bit, the visibility of that active outreach, while sport has a long way to go, and I don't think sport is being exclusive in any way. Are we being sufficiently inclusive? Are we reaching out to people maybe who need help coming through the doors, or help joining the sport, or encouragement and support to do that? There's lots of element in terms of, there's the visibility in terms of role models and representation, but there's also the visibility of sport as a welcoming and inclusive space, and I think we can do a lot of work in that area.
I'm very familiar with Sport Ireland and the work that you do, and with the work that's sort of led by John and Una, in particular with regards to reaching out into those harder to reach places that we see from the Sports Monitor, that there's a pretty much a straight line that you can draw between sort of economic attainment, educational attainment, and sports participation. And the further away from the optimum you are there, the less likely you are to compete in sport. The work that has been done with CARA, for example, on the disability side, is there something in there that can be expanded out into the inclusive space beyond disability? Because, as Aidan said, the LGBTQ side of things is in many ways unique, that there are different social elements in there as well. So is this something that a lot of the good stuff which Sport Ireland is doing can actually be translated as a result of what you're hearing?
For sure, I think so. I mean, as you said, there's a lot of work going on here already. So in terms of the work that CARA are doing, and in terms of the work that's been done in implementing the policy on participation in sport by people with disabilities, and in implementing the women in sport policy as well, there's definitely some learnings we can take from that, some structures that we can build on, and broaden out to be all encompassing, I suppose, to look across the board at diversity and inclusion, and building the work that we're doing in that space. I think there's huge opportunity there, definitely. While there are some, I suppose, and you touched on it, and Aidan touched on it, some specifics for different communities and the different needs that they have, and potentially the different initiatives or interventions that need to be put in place, the broad principles of promotion of inclusion, that can apply across the board.
Okay. We've got a Q&A option down at the bottom or the side or the top of your screen, however you're engaging with us this morning. Please feel free to ask the questions in there. And what we'll try and do is at the end, those of you who've been able to stay with us from the speakers, that we'll be able to bring back and just gather some of those questions together. There's a nice one in there from Kieran McSweeney already relating to football and the Euros, and we'll come back to that. But please do engage either via the chat or the Q&A or on the social media side of things. In terms of the Sports Monitor, if I could come back to that, you mentioned it, Helen, and that is it's a regular. It would be great if we could do it every quarter or something like that. But I know that it's not quite as as on the money as that. But do we ask enough about people's preferences? Right? I know we would ask about gender and that. Do we ask about their sexual orientation as part of the Sports Monitor, or when did that come in? Was that something that you saw as being a very important part of your role in there to actually expand out, or was it already there?
It was added in 2019, specifically the question around sexual orientation, prior to me starting. So it was a question I asked, but it had already been done by the time I arrived, which was great to see. So there is a question in terms of the demographics that was added in 2019. There's also an ethnicity question as well. So it does attempt to I suppose to drill down into the different demographics if we are looking at the gradients and that. So yeah. Okay.
When you were interviewing for the role, when you were coming on board and looking at it as a way that you wanted to to forge your career in sport to this point, what was your impression as to the difference that you could make? Because I always like to to reflect on what organizations can do, but every organization is a group of individuals, and you're in a position now where questions as they arise in this will be directed towards you. Leadership within and across Sport Ireland will look to you as being the all-knowing oracle of good sense and wisdom. What was it that made you feel as though you could make a difference, and what will that difference be?
I'll have to change my email signature to all-knowing oracle, Rob. But I suppose for me, I'm really passionate about this space, and particularly about the role that sport can play. So in terms of fostering inclusion, in terms of, I suppose, promoting that social cohesion. You mentioned it earlier that there's, sport is embedded in every community in the country. There is an element of it, and that piece of I suppose, fostering inclusion, fostering social inclusion, social cohesion. Sport has a really, really important role to play in that. So on that side of things, I feel like there's so much that we can do in this space. So for me, what I wanted to bring to this role was to push that. I think it's pushing an open door in Sport Ireland, I've found, for sure, in terms of their commitment to inclusion. And particularly for me, I think there's definitely, I see the opportunity to build on the work that's been done already, to broaden that out a bit, and the success of the different policies and the different initiatives that have been implemented. And again, to act, I suppose, for Sport Ireland, to take the lead on this and to promote it across the sports sector and across the country. I think there's loads of opportunity.
Okay, just a final one for you. The Let's Get Visible campaign has been very powerful and very well received. Was it more challenging in the environment we're in at the moment, where we're sitting in our homes, to bring together something that was so collaborative, or have we adapted quickly enough so that something like that, which lives in a social environment, can be created in a virtual environment as well?
Yeah, I think we've definitely adapted quickly, particularly in the sports sector, for sure. I suppose we're used at this stage of having things go online, as opposed to having any of those kind of in-person events. I think the willingness from the sector was something that probably, at this point anyway, 2 or 3 days in, has made this campaign look really successful and got really good engagement. National governing bodies, local sports partnerships, right down to regional and club level are really embracing the Let's Get Visible message. And like that, it's been a pleasure working with the folks on Sporting Pride, and also just acknowledge the hard work they've done on this. And again, as a volunteer organisation, you know, that they've been a pleasure to work with. But I think that willingness from the sector, number one, to want to promote the campaign, but also to want to reach out to the LGBTQ community, to show that sport is welcoming and inclusive, and that there is a place firmly in the sports sector for the community.
I think you've done a brilliant job on it so far, all of 18 months into the role. Really looking forward to seeing the results and the output from the research. Have you an indication at the moment in your own mind as to when that's likely to be? Will it be summertime?
Yeah, so I suppose we're hoping to get the final report in before the end of June, and from there then our plan is to sit with it, to analyse it, to take a look at it, and that then will inform what the diversity and inclusion policy is going to look like, which we'll be working on over the coming months.
Great. Okay. Well, I know that government always likes, sort of evidence-based, discussion around what policy is, and as a pillar within the national sports policy, which is crazily enough at this stage approaching halfway next year. It's a good point on that scale in which to actually bring it in. So a pleasure to talk to you, Helen. Thanks very much for taking the time.